I think it's time for the Internet Weather Report. We have a couple of interesting things for this week. Instead of looking at some of the larger scale things, which we'll look at towards the end, I thought it might be interesting to look at some of the more discrete events. Not that they're discrete enough that they don't always show up in the top 10 list that we do, but they're probably important in that you want to keep an eye out for this kind of thing. So the first one is very recently, actually within the past day or so here. Looks like started May 4th and into the 5th and 6th probably. There's a lot of scanning on port 17988 TCP, which is not one that I generally know off the top of my head, but I went and looked it up. Sure enough, it's related to the HP Integrated Lights Out network card. And if you're not familiar with I'm sure we all are, but if you're not familiar with the ILO interface at home, this is kind of an interface that's in a lot of your Blade servers and other types of server hardware that allows you to administer the server with remote control, check the temperature, and do a lot of the external administration, not necessarily related to the operating system that's installed on there, but management of the hardware itself. So this is an interesting one because it also gives you, typically they give you remote control access, so you can kind of get a whole remote control session of the machine as well. And so what we're seeing is it's a very small number of sources, and I believe from what I saw, so I did look in our honeypot, I'll show you a picture of that as well, probably associated with a commercial scanning service. I'm not going to say who they are, but it looked like some of that was pointing back some of the scanning here. And when we take a look at the what we actually saw in the honeypot, so at the top here, there's a picture of what we actually received in the honeypot, one of our honeypots that we have. And it was a GET request for /XML data ?item equals all. And that didn't ring a bell either. But then I did some Googling around. I found a blog here for nachotech.com, and they had an article on how to find all the ILO cards on your network. And sure enough, I kind of highlighted it here. You can see that that's the exact pattern they go look for. And I guess if you hit ILO cards with this URL, they'll return back some information in an XML form, giving you some identification information about the name of the device, maybe a serial number, that kind of stuff. So that's a method that they were showing. This is for legitimate purposes. Maybe you're just trying to identify on your corporate network where all your devices are in case you missed a few or whatever. Someone's doing this out there on the internet looking for any possible ones that are out there.
So it doesn't look like they're scanning for a particular vulnerability, just for the presence of that server?
Right. Okay. As far as I was able to determine, at least in our honeypot, because our honeypots are not responding as though they are an ILO card. So maybe if it did, they might go into some extra pattern. Although the people I saw doing this were legitimate, so I don't think they would, but certainly a rogue actor might be more interested to try to brute force their way in once they identify a real one there. So that's another good thing to be careful about. I think we talk about this all the time. Be very conscientious of what you're exposing directly to the internet. There's really no reason that I can ever think of that you would want your ILO network interface exposed to the internet directly. That's, like I said, the port for administration, kind of out-of-band administration of your hardware. And then there's another interface that would be like for the regular operating system to serve web services or whatever you happen to be running there for the operating system. So you'd want to be careful not to expose that, or certainly filter it to only those sources that need to access it.
Yeah, these cards should only be on some sort of an isolated maintenance network that your system admins and network admins are getting at, and nobody else should have access to those.
So the next one, and this is kind of a follow-up from last week, Brian, I think in last week's show, had done just a specific chart on port 8009 TCP, which is associated with the Apache Tomcat JServe protocol. I did a little more digging around in this, and we also saw some of activity in our honeypots. I've been checking these more lately because we've been looking at some of these scanning activity more and more recently. This chart here, it's a little busy. The dark green lines that we have here are the 8009 TCP scanning activity. You'll notice that they tend to coincide pretty well with other scanning activity, notably the light blue here, which is port 8080, which is also a extremely well-known port for Tomcat. And actually, I noticed that there are certain actors out there. There's a particular actor who came and scanned our entire honeypot on these 6 ports, port 7000, 8009, 8080, 8081, 8088, and 8180, which are all somewhat associated with Tomcat. to some degree, and probably other services as well. And here's an example of what the honeypot saw here. Stripped out a lot of the information that we don't want to reveal, like IP addresses and whatnot. But you'll see it came in here on these 6 ports, 8009, 8080, 8081, blah, 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 which we've already mentioned. The interesting thing here, I think, is the resource that they're going after is /manager/HTML. That would give you like the Tomcat manager interface if it was installed there. They're also specifying a basic authentication header in their request as well. This actually translates to it's OG ==, which base64 decodes to just a colon. And normally the basic authentication is username, password. So they're just saying no username, no password, I guess. They're trying here to see if they'll get in. So again, we've talked about Tomcat before, as well as all the other ports that we talk about scanning, but Tomcat's one of those ones that worries me because I think there's some actors out there who are doing really bad stuff by compromising Tomcat. So just be wary of that and make sure that you've got those closed up and not accessible to everybody on the internet. And the last one that I have, well, the last one of our scanning activity is 1720 TCP. We picked up some activity recently here. This is really geographically dispersed. There's quite a few sources doing this, probably a few hundred or so, not thousands, but in the hundreds range. They're really dispersed, but the most aggressive ones are in the United States, the ones doing the heaviest scanning. 1720 TCP is the H.323 protocol, most infamously associated with NetMeeting, which is an older protocol, although NetMeeting might still be, or at least parts of that are probably integrated with other products. I know H.323 in general is part of VoIP, the VoIP standards now. So this protocol is for video conferencing, audio conferencing type of interactivity type stuff, and it's for the call setup part of it. So I would imagine whoever's doing this, they're looking for devices that they might be able to compromise or leverage to utilize for that purpose. What exactly beyond the obvious kinds of things, maybe toll fraud or call fraud type activities and whatnot, there could be other things that I'm not even thinking about that they might try to use it for. In the top 10 for the most probe ports, so this is the most ports scanned in general, not who's scanning by number of the people scanning or individual devices scanning, but just in sheer volume of scan activity. No big surprises here. There's not much of a change from last week, I don't think. You've got your interactive services like SSH on port 22, Telnet on port 23. Those are typically scanned for and then brute force attacked to try to get in. 445 TCP we see all the time. That's your configure infections, your other infections trying to leverage that exploit vector because that's a pretty well-known one. 80 TCP web, 1433 TCP, which is Microsoft SQL Server. You got your HTTPS, which we're going to take a closer look at. That actually shows up a little bit more in the next pie chart, more aggressively. 3389 is another remote access type tool. It's the remote desktop protocol. Port 8080 is mostly associated with Tomcat, although there are a lot of other alternative web services that do that. Even a lot of these routers, I think, sometimes offer their admin interface up on port 8080.
I was going to say, John, isn't 8080 also known as a proxy port in some cases?
And proxies as well, right. So that's another candidate that could be there. And as well as port 80, sometimes there are proxies that even listed on that as well. And then kind of rounding it out, the port 5000 TCP, this has gone down quite a bit from what we had seen maybe a month or two ago. And this gets back to Jim's earlier story of the DVR scanning botnet. We know that a lot of those Internet of Insecure Things, whether it was that particular group using those devices or another one using similar devices, we saw a lot of them scanning on port 5000 TCP, which is looking for this Synology disk manager software. We actually had captured some packets regarding that as well and confirmed that that's what they're looking for. And then what they do beyond that, I'm not quite sure if they were to find one, but there are various vulnerabilities on those devices, so that's probably what they're looking for there. In terms of the most sources probing, so the most unique number of devices probing, here 443 TCP is far and away the largest number. We're going to look at a more in-depth chart on this, but my guess, I don't know that we have a good idea exactly why, other than the Heartbleed stuff from about a month or I'm not even sure, maybe three weeks, maybe 4 weeks now. the Heartbleed vulnerability was discovered, and we're seeing a lot more sources in a coordinated way trying to scan for this port. So that's probably what's going on there, although maybe there's something else that we don't know about yet. 23 TCP telnet, no big surprises there. Just seeing if there's any other interesting ones here. The configure stuff is way down on the map. If you remember, probably a year ago, these ports were far and away the most, maybe near the top or in the top 5. Now they're starting to shift down. We're going to take a closer look at that as well. And then the other ones, ICMP, are probably somewhat innocuous, backscatter type things from scanning activities going on. 443 TCP, we talked about this last week, maybe even the week before. We started to notice, you look here on the left, and it's a very low number of scan SIPs scanning for this on a regular basis. But then we started to pick up large numbers of them on a regular basis here, probably starting around April 19th or so. There was a divot here. I'm not quite sure what that, what the cause of that decrease in the number of SIPs was for that one. But it seems to keep going up in little spurts off and on here. Not real exponentially or anything, but on a pretty steady state climb. The one thing I did notice, there are a large number of sources in Argentina, which we talked about last time. In terms of sheer volume of sources, most of them appear to be in Argentina, and they appear to be embedded devices. Again, your Internet of Insecure Things. So somebody's doing something with those. I'm not quite sure what yet, but there's a large number of those in that area. They're not scanning really aggressively, those ones. In terms of the most aggressive scanners, in terms of the volume of scanning on this port, it's mostly coming from China, but there's far fewer of them in number, maybe tens of them as opposed to hundreds of them in Argentina. And then there's a bunch of other scattered sources. Like I said, it is pretty geographically dispersed, what's going on here. It's probably some kind of botnet activity just because of the way this is climbing up this, in such uniform fashion. But we're seeing other sources in US, Taiwan, Netherlands, Italy, Germany, and probably a few other countries as well. So zero access. I only did a 365-day chart because trying to get a 2-year chart actually takes a little longer, and I didn't get a chance to do that this morning. However, you can kind of see here that, it was on a decline. It resurged somewhere late last year in the October-November timeframe of 2013. And it's been steadily going down. There were some takedown activities. Microsoft had done a takedown activity. Someone else did as well. I want to say Symantec, but I can't remember if that's accurate or not. And it's been steadily declining here to the point that, they're not showing up on our top 10 chart as much as they had before. Certainly 2 of them are. It's probably the blue one and the green one, I would guess. But I have to go back and look at our chart. But in any event, it seems to be declining, so that's a good thing. This is a botnet infamously associated with click fraud activities. I think did they have some Bitcoin mining too? I think they might have with zero access.